You got some good stuff. Let's share some stuff, yeah?
Okay. Hi everyone. Welcome to KSDL. On today's special episode, we have Carla Diana.
Carla!
Hello.
Welcome. Thanks, Carla, for accepting our invite for this chat. So,
Wow.
if you're new, this year we started a book club on Kiasu Design Life. We've recently concluded our first book, My Robot Gets Me. And who is no better to officially close this book series than the author of the book herself, Carla
Carla
Diana?
Diana!
Woohoo!
Welcome to the show. Carla is a designer, an author, and an educator who explores the impact of future technologies through hands on experiments in product design and tangible interaction. She's a design advisor for Diligent Robotics, an Austin based company where advances in AI and ML manifest in robot assistants to help healthcare workers.
You may have heard of these design firms called Smart Design or Frog Design. She has been part of them and worked on robots to connected home appliances. Apart from My Robot Gets Me, the book, which she released in 2021, she's also a creator of the children book on 3D printing.
Yeah, and if that's not enough, she created a 4D design program at Cranbrook Academic of Arts. So 4D, the fourth D is time. So it's basically looking at yay, we have done our research. So it's looking at the dynamics of design over time through technology. Yeah, so that's all
Yes.
about color. So let's welcome color to our show.
Yay, welcome.
Thank
So
you.
let's
Thanks so much
maybe
for having me.
maybe Carla, you can give a bit of intro about yourself and also talk a bit about your book.
Sure. So I always knew that I had some creative energy and I wanted to make things. And
Mm.
my first degree was mechanical engineering, but I
Mm,
didn't realize that mechanical engineer doesn't always get to think about the human side of things because it's so involved with the mechanism, of course.
mm,
So I went back to 180 degrees to
Mm.
study at the place where I'm now teaching, which is Cranbrook Academy of Art. And
Oh.
I studied design, 3D design, and during that time in graduate school, I got this light bulb that the physical design and the virtual design were going to be coming together. And so from that point on, I just targeted any work opportunities towards
mm.
design at that intersection
Mm.
of the physical and the digital. So in some of the places where I worked, they mentioned smart design and frog design. Um, and now, ultimately, with Diligent Robotics, were opportunities where there were physical things that had a digital component. And the thing about the digital component is that it gives an object behavior. And
Mm.
so I've been lucky and really focused to have a lot of my work in that area. And so a few years ago, decided that it was time to tell some of these stories and write a book about it. And while I was writing the book, this opportunity came from Cranbrook Academy of Art to create a new program. And
Mm,
all they knew is that they were calling it 4D design, but they brought in different people to have
mm,
whatever vision they had for it. And my vision was really around tangible interaction
right.
Mm.
in the physical world. The things around us were going to start becoming imbued with dynamics, sound, light, and movement. And so I felt like
Mm.
that was the place where these graduate studies had to focus. And
Right.
Mm.
it's where I am now.
Cool. So the
Mm.
book came
Awesome.
first, then the module. I
Yes, yeah, the book came first. I mean, I had been already realizing that there wasn't any education
Mm-hmm.
in designing what I might call smart objects. And so I
Yeah.
had been creating these courses for other places that I taught.
mm,
Like I taught at University of Pennsylvania and I taught at School of Visual Arts and Parsons. And yeah, realized that there was nothing that existed. So
Mm.
after having been teaching these courses that I had to create from
Mm.
brand new,
Right.
I realized that I could take some of my lectures and case studies and stories and put them into the book. And then, yeah, the book took years to really finish. So while I was um, doing that, yeah, this opportunity to come to Cranbrook and create this program. And everywhere else I was teaching, these courses around smart objects would be, one course that was
Mm,
maybe not required, elective, and so the chance to actually have an entire 2 year master. So it's a 2 year master
mm,
finance program. So in order to have
mm,
actually focused 2 years where the entire curriculum is culminating in this
Mm.
kind of physical digital design was, really a dream for me. So
Mm.
I imagine you use the book as part of the maybe essential reading during the curriculum. Was that it?
yes, usually.
So the book itself is driven by a digestible framework that consists of five rings: presence, expression, interaction, context, and ecosystem. Can you just explain to us a bit, how did you come up with these five rings? Like, what was that eureka moment that you realized, hey, there's five rings that we need to look into?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if it was the eureka moment so much as really thinking about what it took and how hard it
Mm.
is to really
Mm,
do smart objects, and thinking about the reason that it's so hard. um, and I was watching students trying to be good at everything, and I would actually
mm,
advise them to pick a couple of aspects of it. Be
mm,
Mm.
really good at form and lighting, or really good at screen interactions, and I realized that the projects that I had been working on required a team, required a lot of effort, and also required kind of inventing these new processes. So I
mm,
knew that there
Right.
needed to be a framework, and there needed to
mm-hmm,
be guidance. And then, what I realized was um, that framework really needed to unify a team and
mm,
needed to help all the stakeholders, like a client, or um, maybe there's an engineering group that gets brought on, that they need to understand how important the core of the design is. And so that's what created the framework. And then, and I realized, like, the more that we were seeing these electronic digital products, that there was design that was happening in pieces. Like, there would be
mm,
an interaction team, and then there would
Ah.
be an industrial design team, and they weren't necessarily working together. And the most successful projects I saw was when those teams were talking to each other. So that's really the core of the framework, because it starts with the physical form, which,
mm-hmm,
it's tempting to say, oh, that doesn't matter, we'll do it later, we'll put a shell around it. But it really is core to the whole experience. And then, yeah, building around that, building then, and I knew that expression was a thing that I was doing in my practice. Even, and
mm,
sometimes it was just, I'd get hired to do just one aspect, like lighting on a coffee pot, let's say, but
Yeah.
that was an entire effort in
mm,
itself, because there's a language to it, and there's the creating of that language and coding in terms of
mm,
like how, what it symbolizes, what the colors, what the pattern symbolizes. And so that's a whole effort. So I realized, like, that's like, and that was really exciting, that expression. But I knew that that doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists with all these other layers,
Mm.
and constantly sort of checking up and down those layers.
mm,
Yeah, that sounds very interesting because like I think you made us think of this framework in a different way. It's not like a directional when you go from inner circle all the way out, but it's more of like think holistically at every
Mhm.
stage with all these five rings, right? Also, you mentioned in your book and also in your own podcasts a few years ago, My Robot Gets Me aims to push us as designers to think and design more deliberately as products around us become more robotic, right? So we are just wondering, what made you want to do that? Is it a series of, bad and clunky, awkward interactions with these robotic products? Like maybe you can bring us through that journey as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think, I've grown up with bad electronic products, right? Like the kind of quintessential product is the
Mm.
the VCR that just blinks, and
Right.
or the alarm clock that you can never quite know, is it the alarm set or not, or
Oh
So
yeah.
relatable.
is it 3 a.m.
You.
or 3 p.m.? Like, so and then actually working as a designer,
Mm.
I think it was, then seeing how good design could be. Like my experience at Smart Design was really intense. We
Mm.
everyone who worked there worked really hard, really long hours, but it was really good design practice. We did
Mm.
deep research and talking to people to understand user needs. We did deep iteration where we would do a design and then do it again and then look at it and test it with people. And so, like, everything from the simple potato peeler to some of the more complex things that I was working on, like medical equipment. Um, was always, there was just a very, very high standard, and I felt like we hadn't seen too many robots. Like we worked on the Nito robot, which I talk about in the book.
Yes.
Um, but I just felt like it was one of those moments. Like sometimes there are these just kind of pivotal moments when you see something coming, and that's what I felt like, because I had been working with roboticists in academic research labs. So, like, one of the first robots I worked on was called Simon, and it was with a professor named Andrea Tamaz, who is one of the founders of Diligent Robotics, along with Vivian Chu. And, Andrea's work was really pushing the limits, and it was the very first robot had eyes and eyeballs, and and we talked as a team, and it's always a fabulous team. There's a
Right.
mechanical engineer named Jonathan Holmes, but I was a lot responsible for what the architecture, especially of the head, would be, and I gave it these kind of big ears between
Mm.
animals express themselves, but it was really clearly it was clearly not like this robot is going to become a product, because it was pushing so far. But it was just, that was the light bulb moment, actually,
Mm.
was seeing that Simon robot and feeling like, oh wow, like this is amazing interaction. Like the first time we'd worked on it for years, and then like when it actually came together and the engineers had everything, and there was a demo, and I got to stand in front of it, and I got this like goosebumps feeling, right? Of, oh, like it sees me, it understands me, and there was a way of interacting that I had never experienced with any other product, and yeah, it was this real light bulb that just made me feel like, oh, this is going to be really nuanced and magical if we can bring a piece of it. And it doesn't mean that everything needs eyeballs and crazy ears and this, but it just meant, like, even just the robot nodding its head to say yes, I felt like, wow, what if we got some of those little interactions from our ordinary things, like our
Right.
lamps, microphones, and refrigerators and things like that.
Yeah, it does sounds like, it's really drawing the essence of your Simon project and injecting it into your book. So
Mm.
maybe just like a quick question from what you mentioned as well, like comparing to the few years ago and now, like do you feel like the robotic products nowadays are better and more improved?
yes and no. I think we were doing the RoboPsych podcast, and we closed the podcast, so it's so frustrating because I know that the episodes aren't online. We're working on having an archive of them. They're really great. Like we really interviewed every expert we could find in the area,
Mm,
and I think we thought we would be seeing more of these kind of robotic things, but it's like kind of a longer timeline. And
mm,
what we've been seeing are a lot of voice agents. So I think those things have really become sophisticated and ubiquitous in a way that everyone just feels like, oh yeah, we know, you know, Siri, Alexa, like, and so, I'm kind of curious about how then the embodiment of that catches up, and
mm,
it's definitely happening. And I know that there's deep research going on behind closed doors of, all those large electronics companies. I think it's happening. I just think that, we don't necessarily see it. I think it's going to be subtle. It's going to
Mm.
be like this subtle nod of a lamp, and we won't think about it as a robot.
mm,
Kind of why I wanted to write the book also is because I wanted to point out to people that, and to designers especially, that this would be a robot, um, and that the robotics would be something that would just start showing up. So I think,
mm,
to answer your question, I feel like we're still seeing this idea of robot in this science fiction way. Like every CES, there's a few things that are like
mm,
Yes.
a little thing or like a security robot, but that's not really what I'm talking about in the book.
mm. Yeah.
What I'm talking about. But I do think the things that I'm talking about in the book are starting to, especially with the explosion of large language models and
Mm,
the way that we're thinking about AI, even though like
mm,
that's kind of literally language based, and what I talk about in the book is much more abstract, like around light and movement. I think it's
mm,
all going to feed the same thing. And then I'm starting to see really interesting product experiments. Like there's one by a fellow I know named Matt Webb that's called Poem One. That's a clock that
mm-hmm.
shows you a poem every minute that's an AI generated,
Oh.
Wow.
you know, and I think so. I think it's still very early experimental
Mm,
stages, and it's just this term robot's really problematic,
Right.
like in terms like, well, that's not a robot, but it is, um, it's the kind of thing that I talk about in the beginning of the book, where
mm,
we're going to move from having a product that just had programmed responses, where it was like beep, 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 beep twice,
mm,
your popcorn is done, to these products that are going to be these entities that have different responses and nuanced responses and can
mm,
see and hear their environment and respond to it in this way that's not pre-programmed, that's learning, that's shifting. And yeah, I don't think we're seeing that yet.
mm.
Okay.
You wrote this book during COVID. So has that influenced the content of your book as you experience this episode of change and uncertainty?
Yeah, I had, yeah, I remember it now. Like, yeah,
The trauma.
the trauma. Yeah, I have a young child, and we only let one person in the house, which was this nanny, and
Mm,
then I would like go to a room by myself and just like get it done. But I had been working on the book for a number of years.
mm,
In
Mhm.
fact, there was a collaborator who I mentioned at one point who's a professor at Cornell Tech now, Wendy Jew, and that we had been working, and then decided that I should take it back as my own project. And um, yeah, it really influenced. So what it influenced is I was putting together the final chapters and the conclusion. Like most of the book was very well done
Mm.
um, before that moment, but then it was this kind of like final push of tidying everything up and then tying it together at the end. And the first version of the final chapter, I think the publisher is Harvard Business Review Press, and I work with a great
Mm.
editor, Jeff Kehoe. And I think at some point he said, yeah, like this conclusion, it's pretty dark, like compared to the rest of the book. And what started happening is, I had been working on these smart objects courses. I'd been writing this book. I had created this master's program, and I was doing this podcast. And, it was almost like I was talking this foreign language. And then during the pandemic, all this news about robots started coming up,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
Mm.
And it was kind of like, wow, now we can have a robot that delivers you food, and you like never have to pay attention. Like, and now, and now we have a robot that's going to spray your hands with disinfectant, and certainly it was a boon to the to diligent robotics. So I have a lot of I still work as an advisor, and I still work on some design projects with Diligent,
Mhm.
and they were getting tons of interest because here was this robot that was already roving the hospital, and could it take specimens without a lot of people having to touch it or being, like,
Mm.
but I just felt this like sadness because I just felt like no, 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 like this isn't what I was interested in. I was interested in things that bring us together, things that help us, or the oven that helps us make a dinner party, or the chandelier that helps us like eat a meal together over a table with shifting light.
Mm.
I just felt like this whole idea of these robots like roving the world without us, and with us
Sure.
like being in house alone. And a lot of it was really just what the pandemic was about, but like this excitement over us being in these rooms alone with all these robots, like gave me this sort of sinking feeling. And so I really, and I haven't revisited the conclusion
Mm.
in some time. So I don't even really remember what I wrote, and maybe you all remember, but like I do remember feeling like, oh, listen, people, at the end of the day, like it's got to be about us caring for each other and making, and even
Mm.
jobs. Like I get questions about jobs a lot, and I
Mhm.
don't feel like these robots have to take our jobs. I feel like robots can help us shift our jobs. Like the point
Mm.
of the diligent robotics robot is so that if you're a nurse and you're with a patient, and you're holding their hand, you don't have to say
Yeah.
like, oh, wait 15 minutes while I go upstairs and get a blanket, and
Yeah.
stay there. Like that's really the point, and that's what I felt at that moment. That
Mm.
fear.
Okay.
Oh no, everybody's getting the wrong idea.
In the same light of recalling what has happened, and also you mentioned, robotics products that may seem like a boon to diligent robots. Also, 6 years ago, you presented a TED Talk at Brussels on
Oh
will the
yeah.
robots take over only if we
Uh-huh.
let them. Yeah, and we also realized that you mentioned that your Twitter was had a bit of reaction after you presented some controversial scenarios like dog walking, or nanny robot, or the examples you have just mentioned. So like we're just very interested, um, what was your first reaction, receiving these tweets from other people, and could you also recall any of these tweets?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't know that I can recall the details, but I
Right.
remember the whole thing because um, I was purposely trying to put. It was a fun talk, for me because I was purposely trying to push the
Right.
audience to get
Mm.
to think, and I
Mm.
went I started out, I think I started out with like, is an elevator, a robot, and this
Mm.
dishwasher robot, and then escalated to this, well, how about a dog walking robot, and it was something I was struggling with, right? Like, and I felt
Mm.
like, well, maybe we would have dog walking robots. And then I felt like, well, but don't we get dogs because we like to walk and they like get us out? Like I have a dog now; she's around here somewhere, and like I run into so many people when I walk
Mm.
her, and I felt like, yeah, I don't know about that. And like the nanny robot, I knew was definitely like the thing. And I
Okay.
actually like photoshopped this picture of my son with this rendering, and I put it up on the screen. And I remember the audience going like, "Whoa," and then I mean the tweets were really interesting to me
Mm-hmm.
because I mean most people got that I was being
Pushing.
provocative,
Right.
yeah.
Mm.
And then some people didn't, and I guess that kind of surprised me. Like I kind of thought, oh, I thought it was clear that I was being provocative. Like some people just really responded and said, um, a nanny robot, never, no way,
How could you?
idea this person presented. And I just felt like, yeah, I know. like, but yeah,
So that's all
it's
part
fun.
of the plan.
Yeah, it was right. Exactly. It was part of the plan. So, I mean, I was disappointed when people took it at face value, but at the
Mm.
same time, it kind of proved my point, that like, yeah, like think about it. You're the consumer, you're the one making the choice. And
Mm.
Right.
Mm. Okay, so moving on from that, we're gonna look into more on the courses that you created. So you created academic courses that led to teaching at School of Visual Arts and Parsons School of Design in NYC, Universidad Veritas in Costa Rica, and creating the 4D design program at the Cranbrook Academy of Art. So our
Mhm.
question for you basically, could you give us a peek of what your students will go through with you?
Oh, yeah, sure. Um, well, there's tools for sure. Like there's tools and skills, and
Mm.
then there are methodologies. So
Mm.
in terms of tools and skills, the way that I break down, at least let's say the 4D design program at Cranbrook is and Cranbrook's a place that has this very rich history in um, design, at least especially American modernism. So
Mm.
anybody who's furniture fans are familiar with the Eameses, and the Eameses were at Cranbrook doing a lot of experimentation with materials, like a lot, like the bent plywood that we take for granted that we see in furniture all the time was
Mm.
something that was really kind of new, like it was being used in the aircraft industry. And so but it's really physical making, and then there was Saarinen and Loya Saarinen. There were a lot happening in textiles and weaving, and so because I've been so focused on this physical digital, like I've experienced programs that have physical design where you
Mhm.
make forms and models, and then programs that have interaction design where you plan out flows of information. And so in all the courses that I've put together, I want people to understand that they need to have appreciation for both of
Mm.
those.
Mm.
So it always starts out with concept and story.
Mm.
So I used to teach this smart art. I created this smart objects course at School of Visual Arts, and
Mhm.
that was a really satisfying experience because the course was required for both the interaction design students as well as the students from what's called products of design. And I would
Mm.
always pair them up. There would always be a team of two, and
Mhm.
so it was really exciting to see all the kinds of exchanges that happened. But I started them out, they always had to pick a topic, like some
Mm.
area. Like pets or healthcare, entertainment or travel or something like that. And then, interview people and brainstorm and come up with where the need was that they wanted to explore. So that's something that I always bring
Mm-hmm.
to the Cranbrook 4D design program. And then, so I was talking about Cranbrook having this history of the craft. So I really challenged myself to articulate, well, what is this craft now? That this is the first new program in the
Yeah.
academy in 47 years. So, like, what does it mean? Nobody, like, it seems like a cryptic word. So I've broken it down into form, code, and electronics. And so
Mm.
that's where the craft is. And I would
Mm.
say it's form, code, and electronics that manifests in sound, light, and movement. So sound, light, and movement are some of the qualities, but the actual work, what students are building in terms of their tool set and the methodology, is form, code, and electronics. So by
Mm.
form, everyone has to at least be able to open a 3D modeling program, understand how to see in 3D and,
Yep.
put shapes together and how to 3D
Mm-hmm.
print so that
Yeah.
there's, some foundation around physical making. So there's foam and then form and then code. I do workshops with the Arduino platform. We
Mm-hmm.
all use microcontroller platforms. Some students wind up having to use a Raspberry Pi or something like that, but we all
Mm.
do Arduino and some light soldering or understanding when you need a resistor, things like this.
Mm.
Form, electronics, and code. So and then the code piece comes in there as well, and then I kind of try to I have this kind of 2x2 matrix of what we cover, and it's it really goes from there's a spectrum because Cranbrook's also so focused in on contemporary art. We have this
Mm-hmm.
well-known contemporary art museum. So the work is in this spectrum from more of an art practice. So some of my students wind up going on and having more of an art practice
Mm.
or to design. Some of them wind up really work like one person's at Ford Shanghai and working in a prototyping
Mm.
capacity there. Kind of everything in between. And then like on the other axis would be the physical and the digital, so we look at digital fabrication, projection mapping is something
Mm-hmm.
that I always insist that I bring in folks to do workshops and cover some of that, and then the coding and electronics part of things.
Mm.
So, just now you mentioned form, code, and electronics is kind of like that centerpiece. That also reminds us, one of the videos that you were on YouTube called the Cranbrook Experience. So you mentioned that you built the cohort
Great.
that
You do your homework.
yes. So you mentioned that you build a cohort that makes, creative people with technologists, which is what
Mhm.
you're saying, form, code, and electronics. Yeah. So where artists and designer mixes with engineers and programmers. So, this design slash dev collaboration really resonates deeply with a lot of us and our listeners who are more UX designers and digital product designers. Can you just describe, to us the magic that comes about from this very early collaboration between design and technologies as early as when they are doing their academics in schools?
Oh yeah. So I guess I'll look at like my first cohort. I had, Chen Zuo, and who had come from a program in China that was called Internet of Things Engineering, and
Mm.
he really um, came with these amazing skills of knowing how to code things and um,
Mm.
put together electronics and think about electronic systems. And then I had someone like Steve Kuipers, who was a sculptor. But he
Wow.
really knew, yeah, like he really knew you know, physical object making, um, as well as intense dialogue around always asking why, like, why is it shaped like this? Why is it, what does it mean? And so, and then we had other folks in that first cohort. Um, but, a core part of the pedagogy is critique. And
Mm.
so to have like those people together in critique, somebody like Chen could look at, because Steve was also building um, sort of robotic artwork. And so Chen could always suggest, oh, there's this board, or when we looked at something in the critique, and we would say, oh, it would be better if it moved a little bit more like this, then afterwards, Chen could go up to Steve and say, hey, I know that I have this little board, maybe you want to try it.
Mm.
You can do this, it's motor control, and you know likewise, when Chen might be presenting something, then Steve and the others who are more art focused might really push and say, okay, well, you have like one of Chen's projects was this exoskeleton. It was this thing that you wear on the body, and it would had these bones that would move, but really ask, well, what does it mean to have an exoskeleton, and how does it relate to feeling human, and how does it make people feel, and all those sort of like deep emotional things. And
Mm.
it was exciting to watch, because then I think
Yeah.
the students push each other. Like, so for like Chen's one of his final projects that he presented in the museum involved using ferrofluid. So he created this kind of
Mm.
flow where this ferrofluid was almost like a painting that was ink, like if you imagine an ink splatter, but then he
Oh.
had a magnet behind it that was motor controlled that could sort of make it shift. And it was really to see someone who had come from such a schooling that was so grounded in like IoT, making practical objects, and
Mm.
see him really flourish. And he pushed himself so hard with that eating, because
Mm.
he knew
Wow.
like that he wanted it to be, and like it in a sense served no function, but like
Ah.
obviously it had intense meaning and had a lot of meaning to the people in the museum.
Mm.
So those are the kinds of interactions that I really love to see, and I'm really trying to get more technologists. That I have someone who applied this year who comes from a computer science background, who I'm hoping will join in the fall, and I mean, it's a lot of what my background is like. Like I just had that craving because I had
Mm.
studied mechanical engineering, and then suddenly felt like, oh, wait, like I didn't realize that there was a career where you're drawing and you're thinking about people's emotions, and that's
Mm.
your decisions. And I was like craving, because I wound up working as an engineer for almost 7 years, and the whole time
Mm.
feeling, but I know that there's this other thing to do, and so I'm really intent to try to find those misfits, like those people who feel like they want a taste of this more creative stuff.
Mm. That's nice. Try to find the next generation of people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So among the very personal stories that you shared in your book, you mentioned your son, Massimo, who was 1 year old back then, and he understood what the light meant in his room, and how he knew how to navigate mobile device interface from 1 year old or even younger. Now that is he 8 years old now?
Yeah, he's 8.
So how is his relationship with social products now?
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Yeah, you can tell how long I worked on the book, because when I wrote that,
Just
we was
doing
what,
some
but when it was
mathematics
published, it was
calculations.
already like 4, I think. Um, yeah, so anyone who's doing the math, it takes a long time to write a book. That was a remarkable moment for me when he was a baby, and he knew that it was morning, because I had programmed the lights.
Yeah.
Um, and it really made me think, like, oh, like he might not know how to read a clock, but he knows how to read this. Well, you may have been hearing him throughout this conversation because he's in the
Yes.
other room playing Minecraft. So he's,
Oh.
yeah, I mean, he's really into it. And sometimes I bring, like, we do some VR and AR work in Cranbrook
Mm.
design. So sometimes I bring in like the Meta headset and
Mm.
yeah, he loves that. I mean, I think he gets to see Cranbrook. He gets to see kind of crazy things happen, and I mean, in terms of products, he's comfortable with them. We have an Amazon Echo,
Mm.
and he'll love sometimes to ask, like, he'll say things sometimes like, "Oh, mom!" Like we have all these pets. We have like a turtle and a gecko and 100 gallons of fish tank. He'll say, "Do the angelfish need to eat every day?" And I'll say, like, "I don't know. Like maybe we can ask Alexa." And he will.
Oh,
I try not to say that word like on podcast because it makes people's devices go off.
that happened to us when we were recording
Yes.
as well.
Yeah, yeah. There was a time where we were talking about one of the chapters in your book, and then I
Oh,
mentioned Siri. My phone is nearby, and then
yeah.
Siri actually talked to me.
Yeah. I used to, once in a while be a guest on this podcast that was called Stacy on IoT. This woman named Stacy
Mm.
Higginbotham was running this really wonderful podcast, and so she would coach me before the podcast to use the word Madam A, like we would say Madam
Oh,
Madam.
A,
mm,
yeah, or like Miss
that's a good
S or
one.
something, yeah. So, but yeah, he's just really comfortable with it. Like
Mm.
it's just part of his world,
Mm.
to say, hey, Madam A, like, do angelfish need to eat every day? I'm trying to teach him. I think it's a lot of things are really concerning to me too. Like I'm trying to teach him like where knowledge comes from and how not to trust every source of
Mm.
information that
Mm.
seems like it's a real source of information. As well as I always try to say, please, like set a timer, please, like just to model behavior around how you talk to people, entities.
All right. So we are also conscious of time, and we know that you gotta bring Massimo to sleep as well. So just wanna help close up today's session with you as well. Why we have you on our show is because we actually had a book club and we read through your books and we
Yeah.
discussed around your book. So we just wanna ask, like, if you have any messages to any one of our listeners who have yet to read your book, My Robot Gets Me.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the message is that the book is not about robots. It's about design. It's about design of
Ah.
our everyday things. So anybody who is curious about how your everyday things are made, the book is for you.
Mm. Awesome. I have a daughter, 7 years old, and she saw me reading the book, and then she's like wondering, "Mommy, why are you reading about robots?" Yeah. And I said, "Oh, it's related to design."
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're also wondering, yeah, what's next for you? What can we expect from you?
Oh,
Are
yeah.
you
Lots
writing
of
another? Are you writing another book?
Yeah.
No, I started writing a book and I'm pivoting it to more of a project because I realized that my
Mm.
time at Cranbrook, I have an amazing studio and a workshop and all these creative makers around me. So I'm really interested in robots in transportation. In other words,
Mm.
autonomous vehicles. And I'm interested in how they might change American cities because
Mm.
we're way too dependent on private car ownership. And I
Yeah.
grew up in New York City. My parents didn't have a car. We traveled all over the world and we didn't rent cars. We always took
Mm.
public transportation. So, and Cranbrook is in suburban Detroit. And Detroit is a city that used to have a really great public transportation system and
Mm.
does not, and so I have just been awarded a grant from a group that's called the Knight Foundation to
Mm.
do a project around um, what it might feel like to have autonomous vehicles as public transportation in a
Mm.
city like
Okay.
Detroit. So they would be vehicles in different kinds of configurations. Like they might
Mm.
be buses, they might be smaller, they might be able to break off and take someone to their home, or there might be bus stops, but they're not bus stops in the way that we think about them. And
Mhm.
so I'm bringing on a collaborator who is a projection mapping artist. His name is Motobichi Nakamura. And
Mm.
he's actually flying out. He's in New York right now. He's flying out in a couple of weeks, and we're going to be doing it at a building here that is called the New Lab. So
Mm.
it's next to the old train station here in Detroit, and we're going to turn it into. And our project is meant to be very playful and fun, and just see what it's like to have these characters running around on the walls, catching
Ah.
buses and sharing rides and
Oh.
things like that. Yeah. So it was meant to be another book, and I actually wrote the first chapter of that book, and then I
Mm.
realized that I wanted something that was more about making. So I'm still working on the same idea, but
Mm.
it's going to be manifesting as this playground instead of a book.
Ah.
Wow.
Okay.
But we'll be
So
looking forward to it.
sounds exciting.
Just so you know, we are actually 13 hours apart. So it's our morning and
Yeah,
Carla's
yeah,
evening time. So we are really, really appreciative for you to, just dedicate your one evening for us and, just sharing all the insights that you have around your life and your book, and make this
yeah.
closure for us a really, really good one. Yeah.
Oh well,
Thank
I'm
you so much.
glad, and yeah, it was exciting, and that you're so great at doing your research and paying attention. It makes me really happy.
Oh, thank
No,
you.
yeah, that's our job actually. So we really enjoy it as well. Yeah. So
Cool.
thanks.
All right. Good
Okay,
morning.
thank you.